We're very privileged to have Gilbert here with us today. He has a long and successful history as a mental skills coach with New Zealand's corporate and sporting elite. He's renowned internationally for having worked for over 20 years with the All Blacks, first as their mental skills coach and now as their manager. He's been with the All Blacks for over 250 tests, I believe, and during that time, the team has won back-to-back Rugby World Cups, a Laureus Award for the best team in the world, 17 Bledisloe Cups, 3 Grand Slams, 7 Tri-Nations and 5 Rugby Championships. And he's also worked with the Black Caps, Silver Ferns, Crusaders and many other high-performing athletes. He's been invited to speak around the world about leadership, performing under pressure, mental management, strategic planning, effective business management, and building thriving cultures. So it goes without saying, we're very privileged to be able to have you here with us today, Gilbert. And I, for one, am very excited to hear your thoughts on leadership. Again, everybody, don't forget to pop your questions for Gilbert in the Q&A box, and we'll have a 10-minute Q&A session at the end. So that's enough from me. I'll hand the floor over to you, Gilbert.
Thank you very much. Kia ora tātou, everybody. Privileged to be with you in this virtual world and to share 20 minutes and then some questions with you about this whole area of leadership. So I'm just going to share my screen here because I kind of like to talk to some images, and it just helps me get points across that I am pretty keen to things. So I'm trusting that people can see that screen on your voyage, so that'll be good. So who's Gilbert Enoka? Thank you for the intro. Yep, been an interesting journey. You see 2 numbers down the bottom. You see 597,261. 597 is the number of All Black Test matches there have been throughout history. So over the last 120 odd years, that's how many Test matches there's been. In the early years, there were tours of 30 games and only 3 Test matches. That's why that number is low. 261 is the number that I have been involved with. It was my 21st year, my privileged year. Every year I pinch myself just how lucky and fortunate I am to be part of this particular magnificent legacy. And so what I want to do is I want to share some things around leading in challenging times that may be of interest to you. I will use rugby as my context, but if you're not into rugby, that's okay, because it's the lessons that I want to extract from it that may be of interest and of value to you wherever you are, and whatever vocation, domain, interest, work, play, sphere you operate in. I guess I want to do 3 things in the next 20 minutes. I want to share 5 timeless principles. These are things I've learned over the 21 years that apply to leading, performing, high performing, that I don't believe have changed. And if you get a grasp of these things, then you get a fairly good understanding about what it takes to create great and sustain great performance. I then want to do a reflective task where I want to share with you how we explore paths to get better, really simple, and then I want to cement a core understanding about what makes teams great. I like simple, I like practical, and so you're going to get both those things from me as we spread into our particular next piece of understanding. So 5 things that I think are timeless principles around high-performing teams and great. First thing to understand is that there's no silver bullets or magic solutions. You can get your device out and you can Google and have information accessible to you immediately. In half a second, you can get billions of hits on specific areas. The knowledge is freely available. But what it takes to maintain great and sustain great is work, and the magic is in the work. In our world, high performers work hard and elite performers work harder and smarter. There's no other simple explanation in and around it. The whole notion is there's an invisible standard, and this invisible standard is around discipline. People who are really successful that I know are super disciplined. They do not compromise. And secondly, they do not take shortcuts, especially when people aren't watching. And if you apply that discipline to the endeavours that you pursue, then great things await and great opportunities await you and what you're able to achieve. I tell the people I work with that all they need is 3 bones. A lot of people complicate the path to success, but I kind of like to simplify it. All you need is a wishbone, a backbone, and a funny bone. Dream big, yes. Understand that there will be obstacles that'll present and get in your way, and make sure that you have some fun along the way. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars on big personal development plans. Keep it simple, put it on one page. The only proviso is don't grow a backbone when you don't grow a wishbone when you should be growing a backbone, because wishing activates hoping, and hoping doesn't work in parachuting or birth control. So it ain't going to work when you chase great. Nice and simple, that the magic's in the work, and I love that about the way in which we can get better. Secondly is second principles around the whole notion. There was some research done in the United States, and basically it was looking at the fact that over the last 80 years, the average lifespan of companies has reduced 80%. It's gone from 67 years to 15 years. And in the UK, 76% of companies have disappeared in the last 30 years. So we've got this downward trend, but there's also a group of organisations and companies that are blowing the candles out on their 100th birthday, and they look like they're going to be there forever. And these particular organisations were called centennials. And so this research looked at what is it that these centennials have that these other companies don't have. And they were really interested in that. And what they found was that the centennial companies embraced the notion of what they called radically traditional. And they did 2 things. One is they preserve their core with all their might. They understand who they are and what they do, and they do not mess with their core. The All Blacks, we understand that we're an international team and that we come from a wonderful country at the bottom of the earth, that we're defined by black, that the silver fern unites us. And we don't mess with that core. People coming into the All Blacks want to actually add to the legacy and leave it in a better place than it was when they came. And so anything we do as we move forward is we must make sure that we preserve that. But we also send waves of disruption around the edges. Really, really important that we're interested in better, not bigger. And these centennial companies embrace the notion of tirelessly tweaking. How do you get 1,000% improvement? You improve 1,000 things by 1%. There's a lot of people out there that are chasing the next big thing. And we've found that the path to greatness is around ensuring that you preserve your core, you send waves of disruption around the edges, you get your 1% improvements. And if they don't work, it's really easy to pivot, because then you can just move on to the next thing. And so this becomes a really, really wise advisement to us in terms of what we do. Great term, radically traditional. And it poses a question for you. What's your core? Are you preserving it? What waves of disruption are you sending around the edges to ensure you can keep advancing towards your future? The third principle is around the notion that success is a lousy teacher. It's kind of interesting when Steve Hansen came on board as the All Black coach back in 2012. I think he's had something like 111, 112 test matches, and I think only lost 9 test matches in that period. And so we don't actually fail often. But you know what it's like when you fail. The stethoscope of scrutiny goes over the beast in a much more thorough way than it does when you are successful. You have a new great deal, or you actually get a new client. You don't actually investigate the context and the methods that ensured you could actually achieve it in the same way that you would if you had failure. One of the common phrases we used to have in our environment is, why do we have to lose to learn? And it's a beautiful mantra to keep you on guard to extract learnings that can be wise advocates for what we are doing moving forward. In our environment, failure we define as failing to live up to our standards, where you can win on the scoreboard sometimes, but you can lose when we apply that definition to it. And the fourth one, I think, is something that everyone on this call will have heard and will understand. The whole notion that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think I kind of like, there was some research done, I think it might have been as far back as 2008, where they looked at 100 organisations, and they followed these organisations around for 12 months, and all these organisations had set targets, had set goals for the year, for the financial year. But what they were interested at the end of the year, some of these organisations had overachieved, some of them had achieved, and some of them had underachieved. And so the question that the research was asking is, which one of these two factors, culture or strategy, was most attributable to performance variation? And it's a cool question. And what it found is that culture was 8 times more attributable to variation in performance and strategy. And so that if culture is not one of your strategies, then you're not manipulating the variable that most influences the performance variation in terms of your achievement of goals. In my world, in the world of the All Blacks, culture is king. The team towers above the individual. We trumps me. It's all about side by side, not above and below. We're into hand up, not hand out, which a lot of organisations and teams are into. We want to create an environment that no one wants to leave, because all our players can earn a lot more money overseas. The ones that stay here and want to give back to that jersey, that core, becomes really important. We're strong on standards. You know, a lot of people talk value standards. I was interesting listening to the presenter before me, and she stressed the importance of values, and I totally agree with her. We tend to use the word standards rather than values because we find values soft and fluffy and furry. Standards is this is what I stand for, and the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. So we need people in our environment who are delivering the messages around what is expected and ensuring that occurs. I can still remember back in 2015, it was a World Cup semi-final. We were playing South Africa. We had a meeting at 8:30 a.m. in the morning. All the players were sitting in a semicircle around the meeting room, and in came coach at 8:31, a minute late. And one of the leaders stood up and pointed his finger at him and says, "Coach, don't be late. Are you clear?" And later the coach congratulated him and thanked him. And when you've got an environment that has everybody looking after the standards that enable people to perform and feel valued and connected and belong, then you can feel the pulse of your culture, and that becomes important for us. We love the phrase, be where your feet are. So when I'm talking to you, that my feet are physically present and I need to be with you in that moment as well. I used to say I've got to get home and spend some time at home, and I'd get through the door at home, sit down on the couch and pull out my computer. So I was there physically, but I was not there mentally. Being where your feet are is extremely important, and connecting with individuals and making them feel your presence. And that word presence is a beautiful word. It's sort of, presence is the key to connection. And in life and in work and in business, we want to be able to be present with people so they feel the genuineness of our connection. And with the devices, we have a competitor enter the phrase, and what we actually have is a lot of people who are subject to what we can call an absent presence, where they're there physically but not there mentally. Devices have our attention, not the real people we're with. Now, don't get me wrong, devices are very valuable. I use them a lot myself, and they're really important. But I mean, we want to ensure that there is still some connection through the human spirit. And what we have looked to do and to enable our culture to really thrive and not just survive is to really put in what we call stopping cues to allow people to disconnect to connect. So we put the device down so that we connect with the people that we're actually with. Windows of time and the day that we disconnect to connect become very important. And I think when we look at culture through this lens, it has the capacity not only to eat breakfast, but eat more than strategy for breakfast. It eats inclusion, diversity, job satisfaction, job performance. The big things powered by the so-called sort of soft skills. The last principle was in around the fact that we're taught all our lives that if you want to be really great, that you've got to be at your best every day. Well, I've learned in my work that you don't. That all you have to do is to be at your best when your best is needed, because not all moments in time are equal. You know, I can be playing a game of tennis against somebody, and it's one game all and I'm down 30-40, we get really, really good and get to a really major tournament, and all of a sudden I'm in a knockout game and it's 2 sets all and it's 4 games all and I'm down 30-40. The consequences of me losing in that moment are far greater than they were in the earlier one. And so it's really refreshing and really revealing when you understand that you don't have to be at your best all day, every day. Just make sure you're at your best when your best is needed, because that's what is critical. And so those 5 timers principles, and there's some things in there that people will take out of the learnings that have really sort of guided me. I kind of wrestle and I love that standards and that type of thing, but in all of them there is some wisdom. The second part, I said I was going to give you a task, a reflective task, which looks at how we aim people to grow. So I want each of you on the call to think of, just identify the role that you have in the work that you do. It may be business, it may be home, there'll be a wide range of people on the call that have different vocations, roles, jobs, but just pick a role that you think's important to you. And then I want you to look at the question on the screen, and it says, what's a word or a phrase that you'd use to describe where you and your role in this particular, your business or work or whatever, currently stands today? It might be one word, it might be a phrase, but it'll be just a range of things. Something will come to mind. Don't over-intellectualize it. Listen to your gut and just let something come forward. And then the second part of this question is around, what does next level of performance look like for you and your role in this business or work? So Gilbert's asked you to give me a word or what's your role? Word or a phrase that describes where you're at now, and a word or a phrase that describes what next level looks like. Okay, so just put that to the side and park it for a minute, because I'm going to pick it up. I'll pick it up off the desk in a minute. And so in our world, in the world that we operate, having a vision and a challenge in the future is huge for us. We use the phrase that aspirations get you going, and being clear on who you are keeps you going. So your vision must energize and excite you. So you want to look at it and you want to get so excited by it that it pulls you into it. And this becomes really important. Now, back in 2012, when Steve Hansen took over the coaching of the All Blacks, he sat down with the leaders and he said to them, my goal, while I am in the head coach's seat of this team, is I want us to be the most dominant team in the history of world rugby. Well, the players sitting around in the circle, sort of, some of them, all their backsides went from the back of the seat to the front of the seat. They were uncomfortable. They were saying, you mean us? What about other generations where they had great players? And it wasn't until sometime down the track where people had, we had an undefeated 2013. We'd won their 2011 Rugby World Cup. And if we were going to win in 2015, some people might say, gee, this team has been dominant. And so right at the start, and some of the players said to Steve, when you put that vision up, we thought you were dreaming. There's no way. But now, look at what we've got ahead of us. It may be possible. So at the time, when you put visions, it's not important that everybody has to own it 100% and be connected to it. Just the key people are. It's important that they never lose sight of it. But then you work hard at ensuring you can move into those spaces. So once you set your vision, you then come back to your current reality. And in May 2015, no All Black team had won a Rugby World Cup, away from home. No All Black team had even been in a final in Europe. No team had won back-to-back Rugby World Cups, and no team had won 3. And so kind of important that we look at our current reality. So rugby is the context. What's my lesson? So if you can imagine that you've got, and hopefully you can see me on your screen, you've got the vision of being the most dominant team in the history of world rugby, and then you've got your current reality, which, as you can see on your screen. And what exists between these two is a 3-letter word, very, very simple, is a gap. And what's really, really important is that all high performers and all people who are chasing great and want to sustain great have got to have a gap. And that gap has got to actually make them feel uncomfortable. just like those men who, when presented with that challenge, their backsides moved from the back of the seat to the front of the seat. And so we want to set the challenge high. Now, I asked you a question a couple of minutes ago, and I says, give me a word or a phrase that describes where you're at in your work or role, whatever it is currently, and what next level looks like for you in that role. Now, I'd hazard a guess that you probably know what my next question is. And my next question is, have you got a gap? And does that gap make you feel uncomfortable? And so therein lies the path for advancement in terms of moving people through different endeavours. Is, have you got one? Does it make you feel uncomfortable? Do you know your next level? And all we're talking about in terms of growing people is create the gap, bridge the gap. And that becomes the standard for moving people. There's that word move. It's a really, really important word. You know, that move is sort of all around, not asking you to change things, but some people go to work and they have a credit card gap. It's like that. And they normally drift in, they're unmotivated, they whinge, they moan, they bicker, you know, and what we have to do is help create a gap, which then generates momentum and energy for people to apply themselves in the different things that they are able to do. Hopefully that makes sense. And let me finish with one last question, and then we can open up for questions. Is we quite often, a lot of people sort of ask themselves this question: how do we make teams more productive? You might be looking at your business and say, I've got these people working for me. How can I get more out of them? And how can we make them more productive? Well, there was some research done by an evolutionary biologist called William Muir. And he wanted to answer this question. And so what he did is he studied chickens. And it's pretty easy to work out how productive chickens are, because all you've got to do is count the number of eggs that they lay. And so number of eggs that they actually lay, the more productive. So what he did is he got this group of chickens and they laid eggs for 6 generations. And after 6 generations, he split them into 2 groups. In one group, he put all those that were average, you know, they had an average number of eggs that they laid every day. And then this other group he put together is what he called a super flock. So he took the chickens that laid the most eggs and put them over in the second group. And then he bred these 2 groups for 6 generations. But in the super flock, he only ever bred the chickens that laid the most eggs. You know, and so after 6 generations, he was interested in what they found. So what he found was in the average flock, you basically had all these chickens, their feathers were just beautiful. They were fine and they had a beautiful plumage. The meat on them, you know, they'd be succulent at McDonald's and Burger King and all those sort of places there. And their egg production had increased incredibly. But what about the super flock? So when he went to look at the super flock after 6 generations, what he found is there were only 3 left, that they'd actually pecked themselves to each other to death. That the only way they could maintain their productivity was to suppress the productivity of the others. And when I started with the Crusaders back with Wayne Smith back in the year in 1997, they were a super flock. When Wayne Smith took over the All Blacks in 2000, they were a super flock. And the whole moral and the lesson we can take, how do you make teams more productive? Successful teams need everybody. And once we understand that everybody's valued and everybody is valuable, then we can actually enable ourselves to move forward positively. And the last slide, these 3 things for me drive a high performance culture. 1, leaders worth following. People will follow your soul before your goal. And the goal of leadership is to get people to want to do what must be done. To want to do what must be done. You do that, then you get people following you. The second thing is that drives a high performance culture is work worth doing. People have got to understand that what they are doing is meaningful and it contributes to the overall success of the group that they're in and the business that they're operating in or the team that they're functioning in. Some people say the meaning of work is like a second paycheck for many people. And lastly, high-performing cultures have a culture worth contributing to. So people don't just belong to your group or to a group, they actually believe in it. And when you believe in it, then you are more likely to give to it. And giving to it is a hugely powerful thing for people to do. So they're not just sort of taking away from it, they're giving to it to enable people to succeed. And I think when you look at your own world and you look at the business that you're operating in and what you're actually doing, I hope that there's a couple of things in there that may have been of benefit to you, and thank you for allowing me to share them with you.
Oh, look, that was fantastic, Gilbert. Thank you. Amazing. And getting so many comments through about people loving your no-nonsense approach to leadership. And, I concur. It's been great to listen to you. Also, a comment from someone who says she loved your comment about people will follow your soul before your goal. That's a real goodie. I like that. So some questions coming through. Gilbert, you talked about what your advice is on going about rebuilding a team and its culture. I think we've covered that one off. But then there was the question here about what's your approach to achieving work-life balance for you and your team, particularly, I imagine, with such high-profile roles for the sports people.
Yeah, great question. And I think it's the same for everybody. We live in a fish bowl. It's high pressure. Small margins, high consequences. A lot of people are living their lives like that anyway. I think balance comes from a combination of three things. So if you drew a sort of a triangle, at the top of it, you'd put me and my role. So I've got to perform my role as All Black manager in charge of leadership, mental skills. The second part down the left-hand apex, I put learning and stimulation. So there's certain times where what you're doing now is learning and stimulation. Hopefully people are learning things from this wonderful summit that you've put together. And then on the other side of that triangle, the third part is fun. And that simple three-letter word, fun. And so the balance comes from getting the mixture of those three things right. And I think you can do that in a meeting. If all you do is perform your role and focus on that, you'll burn out and you won't last. If all you do is look to learn and get stimulation, you'll never start and you'll never go anywhere. You'll tie yourself in knots. And if all you're doing is having fun, well, you don't last too long. So to answer the caller's question, in simplicity, it's sort of looking at your day, how do I get that balance? Looking at my week, how do I get that balance between those three areas? And putting structures in place to ensure that you can work into each of those. And we have a meeting and we always start with laughter. The coaches have people that give things and their responsibilities to, then they get stimulated, and then we get into our work. So it's a combination that creates the power.
Absolutely. Question here more from Carmen Bailey asking about, you talk about discipline. What about old-fashioned hard work as a strategy, i.e. you get out what you put in?
Yeah, well, I think I've worked hard at times and gone nowhere, but I mean, the ethos of rolling your sleeves up and putting the work in is good, but sometimes you're better to sit back, get a perspective and do smart work to it, like you can tell that a lot of my philosophies are grounded in simplicity, they're grounded in practicality. I'm old-fashioned in my belief that I do believe that, you work hard and you will get great results, but sometimes it can be, you can spend a lot of time going down blind alleys that take you nowhere. But it's something, you can channel people in a certain direction if they have that motive and that ethos. Much more difficult if they lack that drive to actually do something. So, it's how do you channel it's the key for me.
What about you, Gilbert, if I can ask? Can you still improve as a leader? Obviously, you've had years of expertise in this area. Do you feel like there's still room for you to grow, or would you say there's always room to grow as a leader?
Oh, heck yeah. Like if you just think, I've got to apply the same philosophy that I talk to others about the gap, as people say, and I always use a situation. Let's say I'll use rugby as a context, but the lesson, so, Richie McCaw comes in and he's playing Super Rugby, then he wants to become an All Black, so he's created the gap, he bridges it. He then becomes an All Black, then he wants to become a good All Black. Okay? And we can arguably say he's bridged that gap. Then he wants to become good internationally, and we can probably say, yes, he's bridged that. Then we want to say, what's the next left after that? Oh, maybe he wants to be a GOAT, the best of all time. And then he gets to this level, and then people say, what's after that? And most people say helicopter pilot, but it's probably not right. It's more, why don't you redefine the greatest of all time? So there's always a gap. And, like I still get challenged every day in the leadership role. Things happen that I've simply at times got to say, I need to think about it. I do not have all the answers. I'm challenged in lots of different spaces and places, and they just demand me to put my attention in the right place to help move people to places where they can get some degree of growth and control of over what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I just see the time, so I've got one more question, I think, and then unfortunately we're going to have to let you go, which is a right shame. But I was just wanting to know, how do you develop leaders if they're keen to lead the flock, or are they born leaders who you simply need to find? It's an interesting one.
Yeah, that's the nature versus nurture question, isn't it? That the scientists often ask, like, are leaders born or are they made? I think it's a little bit of both. When you're at school and, people pick up a musical instrument and all of a sudden they just are so good at it. And when they practice it, they become really great at it. When I tried it, I was clunky and clumsy, but they had a natural affinity to be good in that space. You go to maths, and you're sitting there and teacher puts a problem up and I look at them and I think, crikey, Dick, I've got no idea, but somebody else goes bang, bang, bang. I think, I personally believe everyone has a superpower. There's not a person on earth that hasn't been given a gift that once found will enable them to blossom. And so I think leadership's no different. There are some people who, when they stand and speak, command presence, a presence that is present when they're no longer present, So, you've got these qualities, but they're more made than born, I believe. And that's why I think leadership is an influence relationship. It's, how what I do and say influences you to be able to accelerate your path of development and growth. So combination, but more is in the developing and the work that you do with the individual. And it kind of like, it's probably a cool way, because there's a lot of people searching for the what they need to do to be great leaders. I'd rather people ask the who question. So if you wanted to be a good leader, I'd say, who is best to work with you to help you be great? Not to go through a tick your box structure of this course, this course, this course. Line people up with the who more than the what, and that will generate the power to really move them forward.
Wow. Well, look, it's been amazing having you with us today, and the sheer number of questions I've got coming through is testament to that. And I'm just sorry we haven't got time to be able to go through them all. Thank you so much for sparing the time to talk to us today. It's been incredible, and I know everyone will be noting something down and taking it away today. It really was really impressive. Thank you, Gilbert.
Thank you for allowing me into your house, and have a great day, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.